I'm thrilled to welcome him to Notre Dame, even though he's been here before and knows us well. He's already had a busy week. I'm also thrilled to thank Father Jenkins for joining us tonight. And what I'd like to do is, instead of giving a speech, to lighten that burden for all of you, I want to introduce the person who nominated our distinguished guest and who persuaded him to come all of this way to speak with us. And that is Rabbi Michael Singer. Rabbi Singer is the Abrams Professor in the Department of Theology. He's a Senior Fellow of the Medieval Institute. He's the Director. He has so many titles, Michael does, so I'm just going over a little bit. Rabbi Singer is the Director of the Notre Dame Holocaust Project, an interdisciplinary faculty group that designs educational opportunities for students to engage in the study of the Shoah. Since 1998, he has been co-chair of the Joint Commission on Interreligious Affairs, the Reform Movement, and as one of the world's leading experts on Catholic Jewish and Christian Jewish dialogue, Michael is perfectly suited to introduce our guest. So, Michael will now.
Professor McAdams, President Jenkins, ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like a wonderful Notre Dame joke where the rabbi at Notre Dame brings the Archbishop of Lublin to speak at the University of Notre Dame. And you wonder why our president has difficulties about Notre Dame's Catholicity. But this is, I think, one of those incredible Notre Dame moments where we have an insight into not what the world is, but what the world can be. Our speaker tonight, Archbishop Józef Życiński, is a remarkable human being. I will give you only a few of the highlights of his career. But more important than the events of his career, I want to try to convey to you something of the dynamism of Archbishop Życiński, and even more than that, something or some measure of the courage which he demonstrates by virtue of his activity in the Episcopate of Poland. Our topic tonight, 40 years after the Second Vatican Council's Nostra Aetate, which brought about a profound rethinking and deepening of the Catholic Church's attitude towards its Jewish elder brother, still has a long way for both of our communities to go. It took 2,000 years to get us here, and we aren't going to solve those problems in 40 years. But in many ways, Archbishop Józef Życiński is at the flashpoint of both those memories and what the potential future can be. To tell you a bit of Archbishop Życiński's past, he was born in the district of Częstochowa, studied and spent many years in Kraków, where he got a number of his early degrees, his licentiate, his doctorate in theology, and his doctorate in philosophy, before going on to take his habilitation in 1980 in philosophy of science at Kraków. And then Archbishop Życiński has engaged in a variety of activities, both within the church and within academic circles. He is editor of the Philosophy of Science, a journal based in Tucson, Arizona. He was Bishop of Tarnów from 1990 to 1997. He is a member of the European Academy of Science and Arts in Salzburg. His activities on behalf of the Curia in Rome include his being a member of the Congregation for Catholic Education, as well as a member of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Since 1997, he has been Archbishop of Lublin, and also is the Grand Chancellor of the Catholic University of Lublin. He continues an active schedule of teaching in the philosophy of science and in people who are writing their doctorates on the relationship between religion and science. Surely Archbishop Życiński's activities are worthy of further support from the Templeton Foundation. We'll do what we can for you, Archbishop. The Archbishop has written over 350 articles, 39 books, and the 40th will actually appear in English in 2007. You have the brochure, a topic which is one of general consensus amongst all Americans on God and evolution. Fundamental questions of Christian evolutionism. And today, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Archbishop Życiński met with a panel of Notre Dame professors and over 200 students who had a very serious discussion about matters relating to evolution. Before I bring him to this platform, I want to tell you that there is nothing innocent in the title of Archbishop Życiński's lecture this evening. The ironic question mark between the words neighbors, Jews and Christians in Poland since the Shoah, is an expression of his courage, either that or his faith that I wouldn't lead him astray in inviting him to Notre Dame. I'm asking him in many ways to address from his perspective the book which came out in this country in 1991 by Jan Gross, called Neighbors, the Destruction of the Jewish Community of Jedwabne in Poland, which occurred in 1941. This discussion of a pogrom, which took place shortly after the shift between Russian and German control in Poland, was simmering beneath the surface for many years. And to indicate to you the passion that this brought forth and the rigor and vigor of Polish intellectual life, an anthology has just been published in English, edited by Anthony Polonsky, called The Neighbors Respond, the controversy over Jedwabne in Poland. And Professor Polonsky's original manuscript of translated essays from journals in Poland amounted to 900 pages. The editors, of course, limited him to 500 pages in small font. Lest you think this controversy ends, Jan Gross has just published a book called Fear, Anti-Semitism in Poland After the Shoah, in which he describes not something that occurred in 1941, but after the liberation of Poland in 1946. It has been my grace to have encountered Jewish-Christian relations in Poland starting in 1995. And the name of Józef Życiński comes up again and again. Archbishop Życiński is no specialist in Jewish-Christian relations. How could he be writing 350 articles in the history of science? His pastoral activities, which will be the subject of a colloquium tomorrow afternoon, have led him into a quest for dialogue and reconciliation in a land which still has very, very serious divisions about the place of Jews within Poland and Polish society. And we in America have very often very shaded lenses on one side and the other about the nature of Poland. So without any hesitation at all, I invite for us to hear our brother Joseph.
Dear friends, I'm happy that in this academic milieu were developed the ideas of Dobry Emet when they were prepared. I could speak about our Jewish neighbors, and in a new perspective of the evolving global world, we can discuss how to contribute to this dialogue in which how many painful phenomena function, but which in the framework suggested in Dobry Emet contains signs of hope for both the Polish and the Catholic population, and certainly for Jewish too, but I'm not entitled to comment the Jewish reaction. So it is my source of optimism that we may refer to these values that form a basis for our dialogue in spite of all well-known painful phenomena. In 1928, Shalom Asch, the author who was born in Poland, in Kutno, and who died in the United States, he wrote, "Fate has united us, Jews, with the Polish nation for eternity." So there is an eternal brotherhood. However, the World War II brought into this eternal relationship the tragic experience of extermination that would recur as a frame of reference in discussions on the mutual Polish-Jewish relations. Despite the shocking number of victims, the legacy of Jewish culture remains invariably present in the present Polish discourse on the earlier stages of this cooperation with our neighbors. That presence was beautifully recapitulated by the eminent Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert, who wrote, "Poland without Jews is not Poland." There is an element of identity contained in a relationship to our brothers. In this mutual cooperation is expressed what is specific for Polish soul. It is therefore impossible to convey the essence of European culture, including the Polish one, without reference to this form of dialogue between the neighbors who share the hopes and dramas of the Jewish people in Poland. And let us start with a cultural and historical context in Lublin. Lublin, where I have been serving as a metropolitan for 9 years, was for long centuries a Jewish Oxford. It was here that the first yeshiva in Poland was built. On the strength of charters granted at the beginning of the 18th century, it enjoyed the status of a state university. It was famous throughout Europe for its studies of the Talmudic and Kabbalist tradition. Its 17th century vice-chancellor, Solomon Luria, known as Maharshal, was one of the most prominent Talmudists of that epoch. Lublin was the second center of Jewish press after Krakow. It was here that Chaim Schwartz printed Machzor, the second Hebrew book in Poland, in 1536. It was here again that Moses Aaron Samuel of Lublin published Ziz Sadai, the first Polish Kabbalist book. The Talmudic school, established in Lublin by Rabbi Meir Shapiro, was opened in 1930. Among its graduates there were chief rabbis of Jerusalem and New York. After the war, 2,000 of Jews returning from the USSR, Lublin was a meeting place known as the House of Peretz. It was here that the exhausted people received information, help, new hope. Here in Lublin they planned their future life in other countries, including Palestine. About 1,000 Jews decided to remain in Lublin after the World War II. Before the war, the same city was home to almost 40,000 Jews. In the Old Jewish Cemetery in Lublin, the gravestone of Jacob Isaac Hurwitz was saved in a good condition. The seer of Lublin died in 1815. He was regarded as one of the most important personalities of his time. In a sense, the whole area between Bełżec and Bełżyce can be considered as a huge cemetery that evokes the memory of those murdered in the name of racial hatred, inspired by the ideology of Übermensch. Before the World War II, in many towns of the Lublin district, Jews constituted nearly 50% of population. Such was the case mainly in the area near Lublin and Zamość, in Krasnystaw, Biłgoraj, Kazimierz. The names that move many Jews when I meet them either in Australia or in the United States. The town with the greatest percentage of Jewish population on the territory of my present archdiocese was Izbica. In Izbica there were a population consisting of 95% of Jews. In Lublin itself, Jews before the World War II constituted about 35% of population. Today, when we wanted to create a community of prayer in the city of 400,000 people, we found altogether 7 practicing Jews. The lost Atlantis of the Polish Jewish community was consumed by a flood of fire. In the new Polish realities after the Holocaust, there are synagogues without worshippers, homes without their inhabitants, tombstones without graves, graves without tombstones, and memories that have faded into oblivion. Gone are the Yiddish poets who argued passionately with God about the way the world is run. Gone are the Hasidic Jews who danced through the night hoping that in losing themselves in God, they would find God. Gone are the things that made up the unique charm of small towns, shtetls, from Słonimski's poems or the dialogues of Polish and Jewish neighbors recorded by Isaac Singer in his short stories. However, in the areas destroyed by fire and by the Shoah, it is still possible to discover the deepest roots of Jewish culture and Jewish identity. Rabbi Byron Sherwin, a colleague of mine in Chicago, writes on that subject, quotation, "When I visit Lublin, I now know that Shalom Shakna and the Makaram of Lublin are not simply abstract figures in the history of Polish Jewry, but part of my personal legacy. that theirs are not simply an intellectual inheritance, but a family bequest for me to preserve and to cherish. Sherwin claims that thanks to his visit to Poland, he has established the genealogical tree of his Jewish ancestors in Poland from 1450. When they arrived from Spain through Germany and Bohemia, he is able to go back 22 generations in the dramatic history of his people to show the European roots of his ancestral family. This is this neighborhood that cannot be eliminated in a short time in any form of ideological hatred. No less important is the task of directing that dramatic common history towards the future. It requires us to perceive community of values whose promotion is a challenge faced by our generation. In that community, we need to discover positive objectives and set them in a frame of reference where the memory of the Shoah remains vivid and lasting. The problem requiring our reflection is still the question of how to unite the past and present in order to find among ruins and graves the fundamental meaning that both Jews and Christians, as children of the same God, should discover and develop. How should we build a community where, despite the experience of pain and destruction, we will emphasize what unites and not what hurts? It is not a simple problem. When we speak of the neighbors, implicitly there is always a reference to the painful experiences such as those described in Gross' book about Jedwabne. I am referring to a more general community of values that included great and beautiful elements as well as some tragic attitudes. And both these factors, what is painful and what is beautiful, must be taken into consideration to have the objective vision of our mutual relationship and to work out a positive program for future generations in which, telling truth, we will be concentrated upon positive values which are important for our tradition. There were many forms of painful phenomena. As an example of a tragic and solitary protest against European neighbors and their indifference to the suffering of Jewish people, I would mention Arthur Ziegelbaum, who committed suicide in London in May 1943. His death at the age of 48 was a reaction to the massacre of the last Jews during the uprising in Warsaw Ghetto. In a note left behind, he wrote, "I cannot be silent. I cannot live while remnants of the Jewish people of Poland are perishing. By my death, I wish to express my strongest protest against the inactivity with which the world is looking on and permitting the extermination of my people." This was the drama of Ziegelbaum in London. This was the drama of dying in Jedwabne. What is psychologically needed in such a situation? It is a search for one just person in Sodoma. In a famous debate between Abraham and God, how many just people could be found in Sodoma? We expect that there would be a success in finding at least a small group. Unfortunately, it was a failure. And such failures took place very often in the dramatic context of World War II. I would refer to the situation in my first diocese when I became the Bishop of Tarnów in 1990. In Tarnów I was told a beautiful story of a young Austrian soldier, Otto Schimek, who was supposedly shot for refusing to carry out a death sentence on Polish civil inhabitants as a member of a firing squad. During the communist rule, Schimek appeared as an example of a sensitive conscience. During the martial law, his grave in Tymowa was visited by both independence activists and pacifists. They were looking for someone who was different than the Nazis' army in which he was incorporated during the World War II. Unfortunately, it was a beautiful story, but empirically not confirmed. Waiting for one just in Sodoma was too optimistic. During my stay in Tarnów, I received documents from the Austrian court martial from Ludwigsburg. It informed that the sentence on Schimek was carried out in a completely different place and for completely different reasons. His lack of discipline. I ordered, to explain the situation, I ordered the exhumation of the body buried in the grave where Schimek was supposed to rest. After exhumation, it turned out that the grave contained the remnants of a young woman. So empirical facts didn't confirm the beautiful legend of a solitary young Austrian who, conscripted into the Nazis' army, managed to preserve his sensitive conscience. But we shouldn't be discouraged by such example. The lack of one just in the army that arrived to Tarnów with the Nazis, the lack of one just who would be smart and clever enough in Jedwabne doesn't eliminate these positive values which should be regarded by us as a basis of mutual cooperation and common shared memory in which both painful and optimistic phenomena coexist. Abraham Heschel stressed that the wealth of a soul manifests itself in faithful memory. And this faithfulness in historical consciousness seems so important for me. The richness of a personality finds expression not in following the fashion, but in preserving a living memory of what was particularly dear to us in the past. In the Lublin region, there is a great number of monuments of Jewish culture. In those places, Jews participated in creating the culture of their milieu. They demonstrated openness to the events important to the Catholic community. A symbolic sign of that openness was the participation of a Jewish delegation in welcoming ceremony for bishops' visitation in particular parishes, where in the 30s a bishop arrived for canonical visitation. There was always a group of Jews greeting the bishop with bread and salt, old Polish manner. And the cooperation between the church and Jewish, specifically poor Jews in that area, was so close that a month ago I found and I publicly announced a document in which, where in a convent, Sister Superior was to be replaced by another superior because her terms was already over. A delegation of poor Jews arrived to the general mother of the congregation, and they required not to change the superior Martha, because if she changes, who would take care of us poor Jews? It was such a beautiful expression of solidarity that even if officially nobody was recognized as one just in Sodoma, this form of gentle cooperation was an expression both of human sensitivity and of Christian attitude of the side of Sister Martha. Unfortunately, Martha was changed, and her successor was very sensitive person, friendly to the Jewish population, but Martha was killed by the Nazis a few months later. This drama of Shoah had a counterpart in the suffering of the people who lived in that area. And now, when we look for inspiration in the history, for me, extremely important is what John Paul II wrote in his last book, Memory and Identity, where he presents various moments of the history of Poland and emphasize the beauty of the so-called Jagiellonian period as a particularly beautiful time in Polish history. It was the period when various ethnic communities, Polish and Lithuanian, Jewish and German, coexisted in the same state. Israeli ambassador in Poland, Shevach Weiss, sums up that period of harmonious cooperation in Poland when he said, "We lived as Jews together with you, the Poles, more or less normally for almost 1,000 years. In comparison with the whole Europe, in Poland, Jews felt comfortable and secure. Tolerable comfortable, for the Jews were never comfortable, since they were a nation without a homeland." It is quotation from Shevach Weiss. Before the war, out of almost 18 million Jews in the world, about 3.5 million lived in Poland. At the peak period, where there were in Poland about 1,000 Jewish kehillah. Today, there are 30. The Germans, the Nazis, murdered in Poland about 4 million Jews, brought also from other countries. German names of towns remained in Poland like symbols of suffering. Not Oświęcim in Polish, but Auschwitz. Not Brzezinka, but its German counterpart, Birkenau. One cannot expect that the social reaction to anti-Semitic pathologies of one time will be their complete disappearance in the following era. According to the Gaussian law of distribution, even the most absurd interpretations will gain some followers. However, this should not divert our attention from positive phenomena that testify to important changes in social consciousness. In the present Polish circumstances, signs of new mentality formed in the spirit of Nostra Aetate and Dobry Emet can be observed especially among young people and religious elites. And these two groups, teenagers, students, and elitarian Catholics, bring for me a hope that this painful experience of neighborhood of the past would be replaced by a new quality now and in the future. That new quality in mutual contacts has been reinforced to a great extent by the pontificate of John Paul II, and especially by his visit to the synagogue of Rome in 1986. The fruits of similar precedents last also after the Pope's death. The phenomenon has been emphasized by one of the Polish journalists who writes, "Jewish culture long accompanied Polish culture. The present pluralism of Polish culture means, among other things, the memory of the many sources of influences on that culture in the past. The place left behind when the culture of the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe was swallowed up in the abyss of Auschwitz and Birkenau cannot remain empty. Nor can it be only a field of research for historians with exotic specialization. The place of that part of Jewish culture that developed on our lands must today be a place where Polish culture is at work in the cooperation with our Jewish friends. And it is a program that I would like to develop in the part of my diocese where there are many shtetls where the majority was Jewish before the World War II. To shape the memory of those Jews, we introduce special liturgical practices. Just to commemorate those Jews who so rapidly disappeared from Lublin area during the Holocaust, we organized the liturgical equivalents of the mourning, the dead, because sometimes when meeting friendly Jews in the United States, in Australia, I was asked why the Polish people didn't express their solidarity with murdered, exterminated Jews by organizing this mourning service. And basically I answered that in the time of World War II, when in Lublin, for instance, in one night in Majdanek concentration camp, 18,000 Jews were exterminated. There was practically no possibility of organizing any liturgical mourning service because it was practically unactualizable. Mourning as a traditional ceremony is particularly important to the Hasidic Jews, who treat it as a vital expression of solidarity with the departed. I explained how difficult it was to organize in the time of World War II. But to bring this new mentality, to commemorate those who disappeared in one night and who should be remembered and must be remembered, I started 5 years ago organizing this morning service. It started in Piaski. Piaski is near Lublin, and many Jews were there exterminated in a ghetto during a single night. We invited to the morning ceremony both Jewish Kehila representatives and members of the families who used to live in Piaski before the war. I mean the Jewish families too. We began the liturgical meeting with celebration of the Holy Mass, and it was attended also by many Jewish friends, some of them agnostic, some of them commemorating this time where they lived in Piaski. And later we went singing psalms to the Jewish cemetery, or rather to the place where the most Jews were buried. I noticed the strongest response among the young people, who tidied the cemetery area together with the town authorities, caring both for the aesthetics of the place and the memory of the past. Their involvement, their sense of responsibility and solidarity was for me a beautiful phenomenon of expression of brotherhood with our murdered neighbors. Young people were the most numerous group participating in these prayers. The older participated in a smaller proportion in isolated cases. Some regarded the event with skepticism, invoking grudges from 60 years ago. It demonstrates again that the new generation is growing up with a totally different mentality, with a sense of common roots and awareness of the dramatic human suffering that took place in our country. And I was happy when in Izbica, in Kazimierz, most of the participants were students and young Polish people, and among the Jewish participants there were visitors coming even from California. And there were Israeli diplomats who just arrived to Poland, didn't speak Polish, and they asked us to translate the text sung by Polish youth. When I translated that, they sing Jerusalem rebuilt forever. I remember how amazed were American diplomats working, American in a sense that they spent most of their life in the United States, and now at that time they were working in Warsaw. So shaping that living memory, considered so important by Abraham Heschel, takes place in various forms of meetings and mainly cultural cooperation. For instance, during the Congress of Christian Culture. For all inhabitants of Lublin, we organized during such a congress a form that sometimes is called a happening, but it would be more appropriate to call it a mystery. In the year of Congress for Christian Culture, we organized a meditation for Jews and for Christians. It was attended by inhabitants of Lublin during the night time, about 9 o'clock. And we invited the Jews who were present in Lublin history. A special delegation arrived from Rishon LeZion in Israel, that is our partner city. And also the authorities of Lublin and authorities of Rishon LeZion were present to express that it is not only a church initiative, but that we are now creating just a new form of cooperation. And there were even some wheelchaired Poles who saved Jews during the World War II, and they were invited by their Jewish colleagues to take part in this celebration. They recalled, using microphones, how they passed through this moment of mutual solidarity, what kind of threat was real, and how the neighborhood, the experience of brotherhood, turned out to be stronger than the basic fear so strong during the World War II. Finally, at the end of this celebration, a young boy from Rishon LeZion and a girl from Lublin planted together a grapevine near the former Jewish synagogue. It was a beautiful symbolic gesture, but unfortunately, grapevine doesn't generally grow in our climate. So that play of symbols was for many people a strong experience in which we plunged, and we know that not everything will be so beautiful like during this meeting, but it is our duty to search not necessarily aesthetic elements, but these human elements that contribute to a new quality in this culture of solidarity. A year later, we celebrated in Lublin awarding an honorary doctorate by Catholic University to head rabbi of Rome, Professor Elio Toath. And on that celebration, we organized a prayer of 5 different denominations in the former Nazi camp of Maidan. In the presence of several thousand pupils of Lublin secondary schools, the representatives of main monotheistic religions, including the American group led by Cardinal Keeler from Baltimore, prayed near the place where the Nazis shot 18,000 Jews during a single night. Out of all participants, it was the Jewish delegation and the host of Polish youth who were the most deeply affected by that encounter with the tragic history of the place, because some pupils didn't realize that 18,000 Jews was killed, exterminated during one night in that place. On the following day, I received a telephone from a Jewish Pole in Würzburg. The entire celebration was broadcasted by Polish TV, and this Geller was his name, watched it in Würzburg, and on the next day he was spent half a day looking for my telephone number. He succeeded, and he told me, "Bishop, I was expelled from Poland in 1968. It was the time of the communist persecution where Jews were expelled from Poland. When I came to Germany, I had a Hass-Liebe relation. On the one side, a form of nostalgia, on the other, aggression. And I was full of anger that in the 20th century, in the heart of Europe, a man can be expelled of his home just because some Communist Party activists have so decided. At the same time, my heart, memory and sentiments remained in Poland. So I enjoyed watching Polish TV. And when he once opened, it was just broadcasted the meeting on Maidan. He was so moved, he cried. And later he called me to express his satisfaction that when he saw this 5,000 of pupils of Lyceum praying together, and Jewish rabbis together with Cardinal Keeler and Polish bishops, he was moved, and he discovered that there is a new quality in Polish-Jewish relations, in Catholic-Jewish dialogue, and so happy he called me to tell this. And in this context, the expression used in history, Poland as a Jewish paradise, was used to the time of the so-called First Republic. It means the Republic of the Jagiellonian time. For a long time, Poland was a center of rabbinical orthodoxy and mystical Hasidism. The Yiddish press, literature and theater, the domain of activity of Hebrew political parties, later both socialist and nationalist, with Zionist parties and sport clubs included. Oh, this latter would be active, don't they? Trying to save the memory of Jewish culture in the Polish diaspora, now we undertake activities in 2 main directions. One, to keep memory alive of the history. Another, to inspire new forms of meetings that would contribute to the exchange of values and that will inspire the cultural neighbors. As an example, I would mention, for instance, publications by Monika Garbowska from Marii Curie-Skłodowska University in Lublin, or even more striking, the documentation prepared by Tomasz Pietrasiewicz and the center led by him, Grodzka Gate and N. Siecher. It provides a detailed picture of the main forms of Jewish presence in Lublin before the World War II and the interaction of Jewish culture with that of the whole city. The other important form of shaping the memory of Jewish presence in the history of Poland are cultural events aimed at reminding the young generation of Poles about great and dramatic forms of cooperation between the two nations in the Polish history. So I remember when I was leaving Tarnów and going to Lublin, my last service in Tarnów, it was the 50th anniversary of the first transport of Tarnów Jews sent to Auschwitz. It was June 14, 1990, and among the Jewish guests there were Jews who arrived to Poland after 50 years of absence, some of them of Argentina, of Buenos Aires. And crying, they were informing me when they recognized the smell of Polish fields, the smell of grass. They returned to their childhood and they cried. And the Polish people gathered also to express solidarity with them in Tarnów. And when a main Jewish speaker thanked them for their presence and told them that this new quality in mutual contacts is inspired by our Pope, he, a Jew, was applauded when he used the term our Pope to denote John Paul II. And it was this new form of unity in which we discover new values, creating quite different relationships. In Lublin, to keep the young generation aware of the Jewish presence in the history of our city, we organized the initiatives of writing letters to Jewish neighbors. We had a list of addresses of Jews who lived at particular street. The list was given in high school to the teachers, and they distributed to their students. And the pupils wrote a real letter as if someone could have read it, and put down on the envelope the former address. And later they were so moved when they ultimately received back the letters stamped with inscription, adressé unknown. It was such an experience. Several thousand letters and adressé unknown. They were neighbors, they lived in the same old city area, they shared the problems with their parents and grandparents, and now only bureaucratic statement, adressé unknown. So, nevertheless, this painful phenomena, we do hope that the young generation better understands the tragedy of the people who but a short while ago were their neighbors and now completely disappeared from the landscape of their hometown. The reactions of contemporary young Poles were touching after these initiatives. They emphasized that the young inhabitants of the Jewish quarter, just like their Polish peers today, had their dreams and plans for future. yet they had to die so suddenly with the sense of the word's brutality. And it contributes to human sensitivity and human openness to the drama that was as a result of ideological brainwashing. On John Paul II's death, Rabbi Professor Elliot Toaf was invited by the present Cardinal Dziwisz to join a handful of closest friends who kept vigil and prayed at the Pope's coffin before the funeral. Even though Toaf himself observed that in the theology of Judaism, the dead person's body has a completely different status than in the Christian theology of death, he came and he prayed, expressing through his presence that crucial solidarity in the hour of departure. This is a new quality. A Jewish rabbi invited to pay the last tribute to a pope among the closest friends of the pontiff. Quite new situation, and it is a beautiful evidence of the spiritual bond that John Paul II kept building through his entire mission. How does the new climate of openness translate into the language of daily practices in the future? I do not claim that the situation is idyllic one, but in Poland each year, a day before the Ecumenical Week, we can celebrate a day of prayer for Judaism. In Lublin, the central celebration is held in the seminary and attended by many representatives of our city, and even Jews outside of Lublin area arrive to take part and to express solidarity. We invite sometimes rabbis from Israel. Rabbi Cohen was our guest 3 years ago. And in this community, new mentality of future priests is formed. And it is our hope that these new forms of cooperation would be practiced. According to the statistics from 2005, out of the overall number of 21,000 people honored as righteous among the nations, Poles were the most numerous, 5,875. They are followed by Dutch, the French, and Dr. Ludwig Hirschfeld, who during the war was given shelter by many Christian friends, commented, "I find comfort in the thought that such people exist. It is hard to believe that such people and the German murderers belong to the same human species." Now, young generation in Germany thinks also in quite different categories. We don't have these dramatic differences in one human race. And to conclude, I will only refer that painful experience of the time of World War II as described by Father Stanisław Musiał, a Jesuit who passed away 3 years ago, and he was a man of Jewish-Christian dialogue. And he had a first experience of this dialogue when he was a boy 4 years old. To his family in the area of my first diocese of Tarnów, a poor Jew arrived informing that he is starving and asking for a meal. Father Stasha, at that time, little Stanley, asked Mom to prepare a food parcel for the starving Jews. His mom herself prepared this parcel, but before the Jew ate and took a parcel, a Gestapo guard arrived. After tortures on the entire family, that tortures were supposed to have an educational effect on the inhabitants of the village, the Nazis killed the Jew and lined up the Polish family outside their house to be shot. And when the entire family was waiting for death, the 4-year-old Stasio threw himself at the Gestapo man's boots, begging for mercy. The German, who had left in Germany a little soul at home, when he went to the front, was touched and gave up the execution. That scene kept haunting Father Musiał throughout his life as a moving memory of the departure of people denied the status of human beings, who could not hope for mercy or sympathy from the self-styled Übermensch. Such experiences constitute an important psychological complement of the theological dialogue developed now with the reference to the drama of Shoah. They reveal the whole truth about man, throwing into relief both the transcendent dimension of human actions and the natural human solidarity in suffering. It is a particular duty of our generation to treasure the testimony of that solidarity, specifically in academic circles. It is our common responsibility to build the community of values that were negated by the ideologues of Übermensch, who preferred political slogans to critical reflection. Now we, expressing our solidarity, we are able to build a new community of shared values in which human dignity is recognized and the new world of neighbors is built by all of us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Take any questions. As is our custom, it's always nice to start with students, both undergraduate and graduate. Yes.
Yes. You mentioned the effect that Pope John Paul has had on Jewish and Catholic relations, and that his legacy lives on. Do you think that Pope Benedict is continuing that legacy, or what effect do you think he'll have on relations between Jews and Catholics?
Definitely. Benedict was so close in cooperation with John Paul II that most important documents were prepared by both of them. So there is no divergence of theological convictions among John Paul II and his successor. And I was watching the reactions of the Pope Benedict in Auschwitz during his June visit to Poland. He was so moved, and for him, as someone born in Germany, it was certainly psychologically difficult to recognize that in his country this obsession of hatred was born, and that in the heart of Europe this ideology in which human dignity was not a value was so popular. So I'm convinced that the basic principles that were pushed ahead by John Paul II will be continued. Of course, there is a difference in personality. John Paul II started as an actor, so his personal charm and his informal contacts were much easier than the style of that it is practiced in the style of university professor who is much more intellectual. That's normal. At least in academic milieu, we shouldn't blame the university professors. and we should understand that styles are different, but the essence remains the same.
Yes, for students. Aha, okay. Well, oh, did you have a question? Yes, please.
Okay, was there an increase in cooperation between Jews and Catholics immediately after the Holocaust, since both suffered tragedy?
Increase in?
In cooperation between Jews and Catholics immediately after the Holocaust? Because both.
Unfortunately, no. There were many reasons. Some Jews watching the situation decided to go to Palestine. When in Poland, in the Communist Party, there were two wings. One wing was nationalistic, another was pro-Jewish. Both of them were intellectually painful in the sense that communists and slogans were for them more important than human dignity. But they fought just to be more important in the party. And this fighting had downs and ups, but most dramatic expression appeared in 1968, where many Jews were eliminated of the Communist Party because they were Jews. And in that time there was no chance of cooperation. On the other hand, when the situation improved in the 70s, and it was possible for Jewish students to arrive to Auschwitz, to Majdanek, someone responsible for organizing these visits organized it in such a way that the coming students only visited the place and had no contact with Polish students. At that time, already Catholic students were interested at the Catholic University to meet the Jewish friends, to have the discussion with them. But those who organized were skeptical because they were afraid that the communists could infiltrate a group and present their own version of propaganda. Fortunately, after a time, someone convinced the Jewish visitors that when they come, they should meet the students, they should discuss with the people. So, in the Center for Jewish Catholic Dialogue that I created in Lublin, once I had a visit of 600 Jewish students who arrived to Majdanek and for 2 hours asked me questions dealing the mutual cooperation. And now it is really a new quality in which many positive phenomena could be found. Sometimes, again, the Gaussian distribution, that not only positive, but for instance, snobbish elements seems to be also one of the factors that in Warsaw specifically, it is an expression of a good style to send a child to Jewish school, to emphasize the Jewish ancestors in the genealogical tree. So certainly it is a snobbish element that is not the most important, but basically we have now this positive perspective which is a source of hope.
How is anti-Semitism showing itself in Poland today?
How?
How is anti-Semitism showing itself in Poland today?
I would say that there are small radical groups that enjoy demonstrating their presence. So, for instance, in Lublin, there is a group, Front of National Renewal, and from time to time they put something on the internet arguing that they are the only patriots and that in the free country only the patriots should be recognized. 2 years ago they published posters attacking me personally. So not because of Jewish factor, but because they don't like this style of clerical involvement. So small radical groups that do not play any important role, but the problem is maybe more general in a European scale, where there is a regularity that frustrated milieu very often repeat hostile slogans inspired by anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and so on, because they would like to explain that they are not successful. So how to explain? They would be successful because they are patriotic, they are intelligent, they are open-minded, but unfortunately there is a plot of immigrants, a plot of Jewish hostile representatives, and this is the factor that fruited in Austria in popularity of Jörg Haider, in France Le Pen, in Poland small group, active not necessarily in Poland, but also in diaspora. So about 4 years ago I got a letter in which both Jews and bishops were criticized by a party from Chicago. With the members were with Polish names. So when I arrived to Chicago, I asked a local head of the Polish Pastoral Center, how many members has this party? And he asked me, how many names are on the letter to you? I told 5. So, all of them. And it is pathology in a double meaning, at least double.
Yeah, would you care to comment on the World Jewish Congress lawsuit in which they are asking for $65 billion from the Polish people? Radio Maria recently commented on this. Abe Foxman of the ADL asked the prosecutor to shut down Radio Maria for being anti-Semitic. Would you care to comment on this?
The admirers of Radio Maria attended my earlier lecture, and they were anti the theory of evolution. So I would say that very often they are just anti in general. And to refer to the standpoint of the Jewish World Congress, I would rather look for the statements of the Jewish World Congress and not to the program of Radio Maria. Because personally, I do remember when Poland was entering the European Union, and Radio Maria invited such politicians, even from Germany, that the vision was dramatic. When Poland enters the European Union, there would be a new Polish Holocaust. The national identity is lost. The drama of the Polish nation would be a tragical one. We entered, and there are no negative phenomena. So I would not refer to the vision suggested by any radio or any newspapers, but I would refer to the official statements of particular Jewish organization. I'm not familiar what was declared by the Jewish World Committee, Jewish World Congress, but whenever I meet them, I never had an occasion to discuss about financial critics of the dealing with the present situation. I had a situation when I had to reconcile two Jewish groups who paid me a visit. One consisted mainly of intellectuals of Oxford, another of middle-class Jews, and they had so different visions that I and Professor Bartoszewski, who was with me, we had to reconcile them in my residence. But it only indicates that there is a spectrum of various attitudes among the Jews. And when one center declares that something must be done, it shouldn't be regarded as an expression of convictions of all Jews, but an expression of the conviction of this particular group. And we have to address that group and not a journalist who reported on that.
There was brief mention of Jan Gross's book Neighbors. What has been the fallout from that in Poland? Has there been acknowledgement of the responsibility on behalf of the non-Jewish neighbors, or is it more a contemporary effort to improve relations?
No, the relations cannot be improved from Wednesday on Thursday. We must be patient and we must be long-distance investors. As always, the society is different in attitudes because there are people who suffer of unemployment, there are people who suffer of political conflicts, and it is impossible to say that for all the society the Jewish-Christian dialogue is the most important. But what is important? It is the radical change in mentality. The questions that didn't exist 20 years ago, now they are important. The young generation does realize that Jews were important in Polish culture, that we who are so sensitive to Polish presence in Chicago or in different areas must recognize the importance of Jewish role in our culture. And it is a long-distance program. And personally, I am optimistic. Susanna Radzik, who is here among visiting persons, suggested a few months ago a possibility of organizing a common vacation camp for Polish seminarians and the students of rabbinic schools. And I only added a footnote, not to clericalize the group. I would add also several lay students, just to have the atmosphere of normal cooperation, led and inspired not only by the clergy, but by representatives of the young generation. And I do hope that in the future, after Susanna return to Poland, we will be able to push ahead this program. I have already found places where the student could stay and could be happy with the attractive milieu and with cultural possibilities of discussion.
You were next. I think we have time for just two more questions. And so,
To show the positive attitude of Polish and Jewish relationship, you mentioned that the Polish Constitution of 3rd of May 1791 gave recognition and protection of the law to the Jewish community. It was the first constitution or the first such a state.
Yes, that's true that the Constitution of the 3rd of May 1791 recognized the role of minorities and among them Jews. Some of the Polish people are very proud of it. Some sarcastically argue that's normal, that the minorities should have their own right, so there is nothing to be proud of. So in a pluralistic society, everyone is permitted to have his own or her own view, but what is normal for us in the experience of the present democracy was not so much normal in the situation of the 18th century Poland, and it was important that the threat of attacks was so strong. And in this context, the authors of the Constitution, thinking about the role of minorities and the Jewish role in the situation, that was a real expression of solidarity.
And finally, yeah.
I would have one comment and one question. The comment is coming to that question about what happened with in Poland about the book Neighbors. So I watched
Neighbors.
Right. So there was a series of TV programs on public television where a spectrum of people were invited to discuss, including phone call to the author of the book. So that itself showed the new situation in Poland, where such book is publicly discussed with from all kinds of viewpoints. So
thanks for this comment, because I have heard what happened with Neighbors. I didn't catch that it was what happened to the reaction to the book of Neighbors.
The question is, you pointed out two groups that specifically you have high hopes for the future, and of course the most important group of young people. These young people grew up knowing John Paul II, pretty much from the cradle to the moment they're young. Does it mean that, or can one say that this is the legacy of John Paul teaching, or are there other factors which influence young people?
I would say that the most important would be the spiritual legacy of John Paul II. Certainly, there are also factors expressed in completely new European situation. Before, when a passport was not the property of a particular person, but property of the state, and someone was kindly permitted to go abroad, but basically was not permitted. It was just quite different mentality of isolated people who had no international contacts, and there were few Jews in Poland. So basic contact was when someone as a visitor was coming and asking. The priests were in a good situation that many visitors paid visit to them, asked questions, journalists wanted to interview them. But an average teenager had in that time no contact. And now both this European transformation and in interpersonal contact, the mentality of John Paul II, the stories of his friendship with Jewish friends, this was much more inspiring than any theoretical exposition. And many teachers in high school told me that when they would like to overcome negative patterns, they refer to the example of John Paul II and to his life and his friendship with Jewish friends, and it creates immediately new mentality, because even those who dislike this kind of approach are not strong enough to criticize the Pope.
Before we break up, we have some. We have some expressions of our gratitude for your trip here, Archbishop, and the first is kind of it's a mystery exactly what it is, but it's very neat.
An element of mystery.
You will probably be able to diagnose what it is.
You think that we should
I think you should
eliminate the mystery
right.
of our life?
Well, sometimes even when you see something, you're less sure, but maybe some physicists in the audience will be able to speculate on this.
Yeah, University of Notre Dame. And the local time?
Well, thanks to our governor, nobody knows what the vote is. But he took us out of it. As you see, there's a clock here, and this rotates, and then all of these little circles rotate around it. So there's undoubtedly some scientific purpose to it. You may need to discover the purpose in Poland, because we in South Bend still don't know.
I can find a frame of reference where not only time but also eternity is in there.
And then we also have for you, and many of you have this on your coffee tables. This is a book by one of our great friends of Notre Dame, Marvin O'Connell. It's a history of Edward Sorin, who was the priest who is most often mentioned as the founder of Notre Dame. What's interesting about Father Sorin is there are always many founders. And if you read this book, you come to an amazing discovery about American Catholicism, and that is that the priests didn't always get along. And this book is a testimony to that, and perhaps there will be some small similarities to your experiences in Poland when you read this great work of faith. So,